Hey everybody, I'm Austin Cole.
And I'm Mike Flannery.
This is another episode of Money Talks, and today we're going to touch on a couple topics, Mike. So, of course, we're going to give you guys the 1-minute weekly real estate update, and then we're going to get into a couple other topics just regarding how we keep buyers and sellers protected through the transaction, because that's a really important part of what we do, is making sure that our buyers and sellers are happy at the end of the day and we keep deals out of court. So we'll get right into that, but let's go ahead and start with the real estate market update. Mike, I mean, what are we seeing over the last week here?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of the same in terms of shortage or lack thereof inventory, right? That's been kind of a common theme. And so we pulled some data in Waukesha County, Milwaukee County, Ozaki, and Washington County, just to give you a brief glimpse into how many homes are currently on the market versus how many of those homes are already under contract and therefore not available for buyers like yourself to take a look at. So why don't we dive right in? Yeah.
So we've done this in a few previous episodes, guys, where basically we just look at the total level of inventory within a certain purchase price. You know, we don't want to look at everything because the majority of our viewers are probably looking between $150,000 to $350,000. So that's kind of the bread and butter of real estate, and that's what we're looking at here. So just dealing with the general greater Milwaukee area, I guess let's start west and then kind of curl in. So starting with Waukesha, we actually had 332 total on the market right now, of which we only got 58 available. So I think you ran the percentage on the percentage that are under contract.
Yeah, it's about 17% of current listings are actually available to see. Which has been, once again, a common theme, right? We're seeing houses go up and be under contract or have an accepted offer for their sellers, sometimes within a matter of just a few days, if not one or two.
Right. And to be clear, again, guys, you know, when we say that they're on the market but they're under contract, it means the seller has accepted an offer. So the deal's not closed yet. I mean, the house is on the market, but typically once you have an accepted offer, there's no more showings allowed. The only time it would be, available to show again, usually would be if that deal falls apart, or if we're anticipating issues. So moving on to Washington County, moving up north, there's 149 total on the market, of which we've only got 44 left available to show, not under contract.
And that's a little bit better, right? So that's around 29%. In terms of availability. So we've got a little bit higher percentage going into Washington County.
And to compare that to Ozaki County then as well, which, I think we all know that Washington and Ozaki counties are the more rural counties in the greater Milwaukee area, the further north you go here. So in Ozaki County, 101 total on the market, but only 37 available. So that's pretty easy math. I mean, what's about a 60% accepted offer rate. So you got 40% of them are still kind of sitting on the market. And then Milwaukee County, of course, is where we're going to see the most extreme statistics, with 734 on the market total, with only 171 available to show. So,
yeah, and those are, we highlight those four counties because that's where southeastern Wisconsin's most of the business is going to come from. Obviously, as you start to get out into the north or northwest side of the state, those statistics are going to look a little bit different. Counties are larger, but not as many homes, for sale. Obviously, in Milwaukee, you got 734 of them are on the market, and there's only 170 available. It seems to be just as tight as it's been all year, if not starting to ramp up now that we're going into summer here.
I think what's interesting to note is that, Waukesha and Milwaukee counties, being more of the urbanized counties, they have sort of a similar percentage to the accepted offer rate, whereas Ozaki and Washington County, being the more rural areas, are very similar to each other as well. Waukesha and Milwaukee, we're seeing it almost looks like there's more competition in those counties as opposed to the more rural areas. And there could be a variety of reasons for that, but just kind of an interesting statistic, I guess, to take a look at. So,
yeah, I think most of the buyers that we're talking to, currently they're not necessarily looking at properties, 100 miles from each other. I mean, they're really looking at similar municipalities and similar cities to live in, and a lot of it stems, Waukesha, Brookfield, Wauwatosa, Greenfield. We kind of see a theme of where people want to live, especially when it comes to having children and trying to land into a school district that they're either living in now or they want to be in as well. So it causes a lot more of the competition that we're already seeing.
Right. So very good, guys. That's the real estate market update for this week. So so far, what's going on right now. So with that being said, let's move on to kind of one of the topics we wanted to delve in today, Mike, which is, how we keep our clients protected and taken care of throughout the transaction, because, real estate transactions are the contracts are legally binding documents, right? So when you have an accepted offer on a property, or even if you have a listing contract with an agent, that is a legally binding document that, I guess worst case scenario, if there were to be any discrepancies, can be upheld in court and, can be viewed as, a document that can be used in a testimonial, essentially, right?
Absolutely. And that's why it's really important to not only educate our viewers, but educate anyone that's looking at buying a home or selling a home, and give you the reality of what the contract looks like and how you're protected as a buyer and as a seller. And it breaks into what you choose to have in the contract, and that's where your agent, whoever you're working with, is very, very key, because they're going to be able to advise you on which ones to have involved in the contract. And so we're going to break down the three main contingencies or pieces of protection laid out in that contract that we see most commonly for any buyer that we write offers for and have accepted offers with. So
I'll start with the one that I deal the most with, I guess, that I'm the most involved in, which would be the inspection contingency, right? So whenever you write an offer on a home, you always have the choice to include an inspection contingency. And essentially, it's pretty self-explanatory, I guess you could say. You have the right to inspect the home and make sure that, it's in good condition and that you want to move forward with it, right? So, and there's a couple different ways to write that inspection contingency, guys. You can give the seller the ability to cure problems. It's called giving the seller the right to cure defects, which essentially, if you find problems during your home inspection, you have to give the seller the opportunity to fix it before you can just throw up your hands and back out of the deal. But you can also write it in a way that gives the buyer a little bit more leverage, where if you find problems with the home, you can simply just put up your hands and say, hey, guys, we found some issues we're not comfortable with, and we're backing out. And then you get your earnest money back, right? I guess just to interject that, every deal is always going to have earnest money, which is nothing more than a deposit, right? A deposit that is held, that at closing you typically get back. It's just there so that way the seller has leverage if the buyer were to break the contract, essentially.
It's basically just your stake in the game as a buyer. Your usual or earnest money is 1%. So if you're buying a $200,000 house, it's pretty common to see $2,000 as earnest money, which is, like I said, your stake in the game. It's basically telling the sellers that you're putting some sort of cash and
yeah, you got
you're willing to go through the deal,
right? Yeah, absolutely. So. And then when we go through the inspection contingency, guys, this is really where, in my opinion, I really take a lot of pride in this, and I feel I really shine here because I actually don't usually have deals fall apart too often during the home inspection contingency, because when I'm looking at homes with buyers, for me personally, it's not so much about trying to sell the house, oh, look how pretty the floors are, or, oh, hey, wow, what nice landscaping. I usually leave the cosmetics up to the buyer to determine what their thoughts are on it, because we all have different opinions. Really what I'm looking for are problems, so having been to dozens and dozens of home inspections throughout my career at this point, and being a homeowner that has essentially remodeled a old farmhouse that came with a slew of issues, I've gotten pretty good at being able to pick out issues, such as a bad roof, mechanicals that are about to fail, like a water heater or a furnace, structural issues, things like that. And again, to reiterate, I'm not an inspector, so when I give advice on that, it shouldn't be taken as gospel. But usually when I'm looking at a home with a buyer, I can give them a pretty good idea of, hey, your inspector's going to say this.
Yeah, and that's extremely important, because what ends up happening is your inspection, takes place, or we would like it to take place as soon as possible to your accepted offer, right? Because we want to see what the ins and outs of the home are, right? If it's something that you're comfortable with, if it's something that may require the seller to fix, we need all that to be worked out, because your second level of protection would be your appraisal contingency, and so that protects you in two ways. Depending on what kind of loan you have, not only is it going to protect you in terms of the investment you're making, but it also protects you to make sure that anything that does need to be fixed per the appraisal or per the loan program that you're buying in also gets addressed at that point as well. So you might have something that does not come up on inspection that may come up on the appraisal. We've seen that obviously countless countless amount of times. So the appraisal is key because it gives you the value of the property based on comparable sales in a short period of time in that area. So if you're buying a $250,000 house and you make an offer at $250,000, if the appraiser comes in, does the appraisal report, and says that the house is only worth $230,000, your protection is that you're no longer liable to buy that home because it's not appraised for the value that you are offering to buy it, and therefore the bank will not secure that unless you were to cover the difference in cash.
And usually in that situation, there's some sort of negotiation that comes about. I mean, and that we do run into that occasionally. I'll say it's not overly often that we have it where properties don't appraise for the purchase price, but when you have an inflated market like what we have right now, you do run into it sometimes where, hey, the appraiser might say, look, you guys are at, as an example, an offer price of $260,000, but just looking at all the comparables, it's really looking like the house is probably worth maybe closer to the $250,000 mark. And at that point, if we run into that issue and the appraiser disagrees with the purchase price, usually there'll be some sort of negotiation where the buyer and seller are to some degree able to meet in the middle, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always good, information to have because a lot of people don't understand the steps that it takes to, have the home appraised and inspected. And so I think it's really important we're going through these because all of these levels of protection line up to something that I deal with on every transaction, which is your financing contingency. And so you got to remember, guys, in the contract, each one of these contingencies essentially is going to have a number of days. So once an accepted offer is taken, right? It's not as if we can just operate the deal, and as long as we close the loan on the closing date, everything's going to be fine. There are steps that need to be met in order for not only the buyers to be protected, but it also gives the sellers that protection that, hey, by this day, we're going to know if the house appraises. By this day, we are going to know if the buyer's loan is ready to go, and so on and so forth. And so the financing contingency protects you, but it also protects the seller because it's going to let them know if the deal is going to come together or not. And for the buyers, the financing contingency is really important because it gives you the option, which we've seen before, especially right now with a lot of things going on with COVID-19 and different employment impacts that has. The financing contingency protects you. So if, for example, you or your significant other or whoever you're dealing with on the deal was to, let's just say, lose their job, or had been laid off or something like that, it protects you where, hey, the loan is not going to go through. And so due to these circumstances, the contract has that written in so that you're protected and you're not liable to buy that home at that point.
Right. I think it's important to know like how the appraisal ties in with that financing contingency, because if you can't get past the appraisal contingency and come to an agreement there, you're not able to issue loan commitment, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if the house doesn't appraise out, yep, we have to come to some sort of agreement there. So they're tied together. And, and honestly, guys, the appraisal and the inspection to a certain degree are tied together as well. I mean, something that I'll sort of interject with that too, you stated how certain loan programs have different appraisal requirements, essentially. So as an example, we talk a lot about FHA loans and VA loans, and I know we'll go into it more in depth in another episode as well. But one of the main things with those loans is that the appraiser is actually going to come out and they have a certain set of guidelines that house needs to meet. And there's all sorts of reasons for that we'll get into in another episode. But essentially, one of the big ones that we run into a lot is peeling paint on older homes. And this dates all the way back to the lead-based paint laws that were put in place back in the 70s, where essentially you can't use lead-based paint anymore because of the health concerns. We had children, eating lead paint, essentially. And when I'm looking at a home and I know that the loan program is going to be a VA loan or an FHA loan because that's what the buyer is pre-approved with, I'll go above and beyond, not only just looking for normal issues that would come up during inspection, but also things that I'm familiar are common to come up during an appraisal like that.
And that's where the communication between your team, and when I say your team, if you're a buyer or a seller, right, your team may consist of a different category of what you're working with here. But on the buy side, having a lender and a realtor be on the same page and be in constant communication is critical, because if you're able to be pre-approved through an FHA loan program, your real estate agent needs to know that, because the homes that you're looking at may or may not fit into what that appraisal may look like or what's required on that loan. And so if your realtor doesn't have those details from the lender and back and forth, it can cause problems and make the transaction a little bit more in depth than it needs to be. To whereas if we knew that on the front side, you might run into less issues, let's just say. But those are basically the three main levels of protection that go into the sales contract. And like I said, we'll break it down, a little bit further in future episodes. But I thought it was really important to educate you guys on that, because there are so many people that get accepted offers and after going through the contract have a ton of questions, and they don't know that those are necessarily in there up front until you do it. And so it's really important to know that ahead of time, that you have various levels of protection throughout the process that not only protect you, but they protect your investment as well.
Yeah, and actually the contingencies can be used as a way to make your offer stronger as well. Because one thing to keep in mind is that fewer contingencies in an offer usually leads to a stronger offer. I mean, there's really two things that make an offer strong: purchase price and the contingencies. So if you have a strong purchase price and fewer contingencies, being, let's say you write an offer, and this does happen. I always recommend everybody has an inspection, but if you're an individual that maybe has experience in working with homes or comes from a construction background, for example, you may feel comfortable inspecting that home yourself with your own knowledge and your own experience. And by foregoing that inspection contingency, you're sort of assuring the seller, hey, look, we're not going to have any issues with this. Hey, as long as the house appraises and I get the loan, we're going to close. Same thing if it's a cash offer. You're removing that financing contingency now. You're removing that appraisal contingency now. And it's one less hang up that can happen in the deal where there's going to be an issue, and it assures the seller that deal is going to close. So those contingencies can be manipulated to put buyers in an advantageous spot. But it's definitely something, when you're on the selling end, when I'm dealing with sellers, we look at those contingencies when we're going over offers to determine which offer is the strongest. So it plays into both ends of the transaction.
It does make a difference. And I communicate with a lot of real estate agents from different companies, different areas, different price points. Some specialize in higher price stuff. Some specialize in lower price stuff. And at the end of the day, on your end of it, right, when you're working with sellers, especially in a market like this, there are usually multiple offers to go over. And so if all of the purchase price on every offer was the same, the only thing that might differentiate one offer from the other would be the contingency dates or the closing date.
It happens
right?
all the time. Right.
If you're trying to sell your house and someone offered to buy it, let's just say for $250,000, but they want to close the loan on August 1st versus another offer that comes in is the same purchase price, but they want to close on July 1st, totally different scenario, right? So those do make a big difference, not only closing date, but contingency dates. And that's why it's really important to have a lender you trust, because if you are able to have less of a financing or appraisal contingency on your offer, it does make you just a stronger offer to begin with.
Just to touch on that point that you made with the closing date, and then we'll wrap it up, that can go either way as well. Having a quicker close date can sometimes be advantageous if you have a seller that's looking to sell their property as quick as possible. And usually a quicker close date is going to be advantageous to the buyer if we know that we have a seller that's selling an investment property, right?
Sure.
Or a vacant property that's just sitting, costing them money. But other times you might be in a situation where the buyer wants to close sooner, but the seller actually needs more time, and because they might be buying another home and need time to move, and they would rather go with the offer that has the longer closing date. So it can go either way.
It absolutely can.
So
100% right.
So that's basically it, guys. I think we'll kind of wrap it up there, Mike. So again, I'm Austin Cole.
And I'm Mike Flannery.
This has been another episode of Money Talks. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next week.